Hello, I'm South Ops meteorologist Jonathan O'Brien. Today's video is an update of our seasonal weather and fire potential outlook as we start to move into the peak part of the fire year. Refer to our posted seasonal outlook on our website for additional information. It's been a rather warm spring across California as we prepare to officially transition into summer. Most of the region has been about 1 to 4 degrees above average for the spring, especially across the interior. However, coastal temperatures, especially across the south coast, have been a little below average as below normal sea surface temperatures off the California coast have kept the marine layer air a little cooler than average. Precipitation over that same period has generally run below normal. Most areas have seen at least half of their normal rainfall, which, while not great, is actually an improvement over the extreme dryness which began our past rainy season. Also of note is the well above normal rainfall that has occurred in a lot of our desert areas, much of that coming courtesy of some early season subtropical moisture in late May and early June. Nonetheless, if we look at percent of normal rainfall for the past 6 months, going all the way back to December, you can see just how widespread and significant the dryness was for the season, hence why what we saw over the second half of the rainy season and into the spring was actually an improvement over the bone-dry conditions that preceded the January fires. The dry conditions led to the expansion of drought across much of central and southern California this winter and spring, while northern California was wetter. Large swaths of our area are now and will likely remain in moderate to severe drought. We are still in very good shape in terms of bigger picture and long-term issues like reservoir levels and water supply, as we continue to carry forward a ton of surplus rainfall from the past couple of years and another very wet season across Northern California. But the large precipitation deficits over our region from this winter have contributed to the emergence of at least a short-term drought condition. Here's a look at the 1,000-hour dead fuel moisture graph for the South Ops area as a whole. We like to use 1,000-hour fuels to capture seasonal trends. Of course, there are some areas that are wetter or drier than the area-wide average, but for seasonal perspectives, we try to keep a pretty wide berth. You can see the extreme dryness from the first part of this winter, which was then followed by generally more typical conditions for much of the late winter and spring. But over the past month or so, we've started to tip back below normal, due in large part to the above-average temperatures. And as of this recording, you can see by the green forecast line that we're likely going to trend towards significantly below normal 1,000-hour fuel moistures heading through the middle of June. Again, there is more variability than this shows. Some areas have received some of that subtropical moisture and are in a little bit better shape, but some areas are even drier, with a few PSAs likely to trend towards record dry 1,000-hour fuel moistures for this time of year in the coming week. Here's a look at the live fuel moisture data out of LA County, which is a fair middle ground on what we're seeing across the region. Again, you can certainly find wetter or drier examples in different areas. While our winter was quite a bit drier than normal overall, the fact that a lot of our rain came during the peak growing season from late February through mid-April actually encouraged a pretty strong growing season. Grass crop growth was fairly robust, though not nearly to the level of the past couple of very wet years, and live fuel moisture averages peaked above normal in most areas. However, the older growth tended not to respond as much due to the below-normal total rainfall, and we've seen pretty sizable declines in a lot of the live fuels over the past few weeks. It was really those very high new growth LFMs that led much of the averages to being above normal, and those really high values of 150 to 250% or more don't last for long, with the averages now starting to be dragged down more by the drier old growth. At least for the LA County average data here, we've dropped back pretty close to normal, and well below where we were in 2024, which was a busy fire year in its own right. And extrapolating out the trends, it does seem that live fuel moistures, both here and more broadly regionally, will generally fall below average in the weeks ahead. Also, as is normal for this time of year, just about all of the lower elevation grasses have now cured out, so there is plenty of dead fine fuel available to carry fire. In terms of our weather conditions in the coming months, the global sea surface temperature, or SST, anomalies offer some clues. One feature that stands out to me are the well above normal SSTs across the Pacific, near and north of the Hawaiian Islands, as well as on the other side of the U.S. across the Gulf of America. These warm waters are likely to promote strong high pressure across large swaths of the subtropics this summer, and it is that subtropical high pressure that makes California so hot in the summer, so making it stronger than average should also boost temperatures above average as well. The warm waters in the Gulf and the Caribbean Sea are also likely to provide ample moisture for the desert southwest monsoon, which will likely be getting into gear quite soon. Also of note, however, are the cooler-than-normal waters off the California coast and also off the Baja coast. It's those cool waters that are chiefly responsible for that strip of below-normal temperatures you saw earlier across the coastal areas. And because of them, it's likely we're going to see a continued fair amount of marine influence and cooler temperatures across the coasts well into the summer, likely well into July or even August, though on average the marine layer should become shallower with time, as happens every year. But it will likely result in the lower elevation coastal areas continuing to be the coolest areas relative to average of the entire region. Those cool waters off the west coast can also act to essentially push back against the warmer waters in the Gulf and the Caribbean. In other words, while the monsoon is likely to be quite active this summer, it may tend to get shoved a little further east on average relative to normal, which I'll talk more about in a moment. One thing we don't have to contend with at the moment is the presence of El Niño or La Niña conditions, with temperatures along the equator in the Pacific generally near normal, although in reality that actually makes the seasonal forecast more difficult, as you tend to get a wider array of possibilities in these neutral-type conditions without El Niño or La Niña. Here's a computer model forecast of temperatures compared to normal for the period of July through September. You can see with the orange shaded colors that it is forecasting broadly above normal temperatures over much of the West, including California, with more moderated conditions towards the coast. And this is likely to be in the ballpark of what we end up seeing. And again, this is a forecast for relative to normal. Of course, it is always hot across the interior West in the summertime, but this indicates temperatures will probably average even a little hotter than normal. And for precipitation over the same period, the same model is indicating near normal precipitation for California, which in the summer months isn't a whole lot for most of the region. You can see the broad areas of above normal precipitation in the green shadings over New Mexico, West Texas, and south of the border. That's indicative of strong monsoonal activity, but that monsoonal activity may be more often than not shunted more eastward compared to normal, due in part to those cooler sea surface temperatures off the coasts of California and Baja. So while we will likely see some monsoonal moisture this summer, it may be inconsistent. This could lead to brief reductions in fire danger due to moisture, but an inconsistent stop-and-start type monsoon pattern can also be problematic for lightning ignitions, due to alternating patterns of lightning activity followed by hotter and drier weather. So we will definitely have to be watching lightning activity closely this summer. All in all, there are a lot of ingredients in place for above-normal fire activity this summer and potentially fall as well. Above normal temperatures, a dry, rainy season, but with residual fuel buildup from recent much wetter years is often a bad combination. As a result, we continue to highlight above normal significant fire potential for much of the region in the coming months. There is always a chance that fortune smiles upon us and conditions end up less severe than expected. The most likely way that would happen would be if the monsoon, which we do expect to be very active over the desert southwest, is able to shift its way further west than we expect and provide a wetter than expected summer to our mountain areas. There's also the even more outside possibility of getting widespread moisture from a tropical system to affect the region, though we have seen it multiple times in recent years. But with so many indicators pointing towards a more active fire season, the forecast continues to go in that direction. So while it's never a surprise to see fire on the ground in our region over the summer, the state of the weather and fuels do support an active few months ahead. At this early stage, we'll take a pass on speculating too much about the fall offshore wind season. However, with live fuel moistures likely to be below normal by this fall and heavy fuel buildup from the recent wet years, that in and of itself will likely leave our level of background risk higher than average heading into the fall. We'll start to sprinkle in a little more detail on the fall forecast in our next Outlook. That's it for today's video. We hope you found it informative, and as always, feel free to reach out to us with any questions, whether on this video or otherwise. We are here to help. And lastly, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel as we work to keep bringing you new content. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.